Moving from the second, now we are on the third quarter where I'm studying, and then our final or fourth quarter is where I'm studying. Now, what do we need to do in each of these quarters? Remember, we called these point-centered quadrat method. And a quadrat is a quarter of a circle, and we've divided our circle into 4 quarters. Now, let's see what we can be able to do with these quarters. Once we get into the first quarter, the first thing that we need to do, we call this the point, just like defined in Pcq point. Centered, where we are, it's the center. Quarter is where I am. We first of all start with the first quarter. And in this quarter, if we can check onto my left hand side, you realize there is a 3. And if you look further, there is another 3. So what we need to do at that point is to identify the individual 3 that is closest to the point within that quarter. As you can see, this quarter is demarcated by this pole on the ground and this other one that identifies the baseline along which we are going to have our transect. So in this quarter, the 3 that is closest to us is this one, Macamia. If we have to identify this, is Macamia. And once we have identified that one as the closest, then we must get the measurements from the point to the individual. And I'll have Samoe here assisting me. And we must check from the center of the trunk to the point, and that will be 2.5 meters. So our tree is 2.5 meters away from the point. And that is what we refer to as point to plant distance. Once we have that, and I'm sure in this case from your theory, I'm sure you must have known the need to come up with data sheets. So the first column, you must indicate the point, which we identify here as point number 1. And then the second column will indicate the quarter. We are in quarter number 1. And the third column will indicate the species, which we have identified as Macamia. Then the fourth column will indicate the point to plant distance, which we have already indicated as 2.5 meters. And once we have that measurement in our data sheet, having measured that distance using the tape measure, which I'm holding, that is one of the tools that you must have in the field. Once that one is done, then the second thing that we must undertake is the measurement of the diameter of our tree that we have identified in that quarter. And that diameter is measured using a vernier caliper. Vernier calipers, you know them from the engineers. They are also used by ecologists. And once we have these, it can be able to tell us the diameter of the trunk. I'm sure you cannot be able to see it properly, but in our case here, hoping you can be able to see where the vernier caliper is, we can be able to measure that diameter. And in our case here, we have 10.2 centimeters. That is going into our 5th column, which is indicated as diameter of the species that we encounter. Once you have that, at what point do we measure the species diameter? The required height from the ground is what we refer to as breast height. But many of us do not have the same breast height if you are measured from the ground. And the measurement that we take is either 1.3, which you must always indicate because in the future you'd want to do some monitoring, or 1.5 meters, and you have to indicate that in your write-up. Once we are through with that measurement, then we have to ask ourselves, is there any other measurement that you may be required to measure or to estimate? In this case, it all depends on the kind of objectives that we have. But I would request that at every point that we encounter the species of interest, we must always use the tape measure to estimate the canopy of the species within that given quarter. And for instance, assuming this is the tree, because we cannot be able to demonstrate with the whole tree, assuming this is a tree, we have first of all to understand many of the canopies assume a circular kind of shape if you are looking at it from the top. And all what you need to do is to measure from either north, south, and the canopy in our case is defined as the vertical projection of the canopy downwards onto the ground. And all what we need to do is to know exactly where the canopy reaches, and if that is north-south direction, then you must take another perpendicular measurement, which is going to be east-west, and you have to check on the canopy to know exactly where it projects onto the ground. And the two measurements, you later on be able to average them to be able to get the canopy diameter of that specific individual. Once you are through with that measurement, the other thing that we need to do for the other measurements that we need to estimate is the height of the tree. We don't have the chronometer here with us, but that is the instrument that we normally use, and I'm sure it must have been demonstrated somewhere. We don't have the instrument at this particular moment, but remember, chronometer is used to estimate the height of the tree. And there are many other parameters or other measurements or other estimates that you can be able to undertake, and this is specifically based on the kind of objectives that we are having in as far as our study is concerned. Once you are through with that quadrant, then you move to the second quadrant. Of course, I'm assuming where the camera is a species behind it, which you cannot be able to see. And we need actually to repeat the same procedure that we have undertaken in the first quadrant. And this goes on for the third and the fourth quadrant. At times, there are periods when we cannot be able to to identify the species in the field. And the best that we can be able to do is to use a Sakatua. And we take a kind of a sample. And you cannot go to the field without obviously what you know as the plant press. And as you can see in this, although we are not going to demonstrate exactly how it is done here, it's something you must have done in your herbarium here in Chiromo. And I'm sure Mutiso and the rest of the people who are in botany, they must have demonstrated to you how to use the plant press. This is to allow you to take your sample to the herbarium so that it can be positively identified, so that by the time you are doing your analysis for the data, you do not miss the actual identification of the species that you have encountered in the field. Now, once you are through with this point, during your initial stages of sampling, you must have identified the interpoint intervals. And the interpoint intervals is, for instance, how far